The next thing that I wanted to kind of put on the record for official statements, we've had people calling and concerned and accusations being made that the school district does not follow through with allegations about abuse of children, staff, etc. So what we have been doing with all of these allegations that are brought to our attention, we do take them to the next level, and I would encourage anyone that has any information or concerns, or possibly, their child or have an accusation that their child is being abused. There's I encourage you to contact the authorities, and that's been the process all along. The authorities overlook some of these accusations that have been made, and we thought it was very important to kind of read this into the record in light of all the things that are happening in the news, so that there is confidence within our district that we are doing everything that we need to be doing, and we encourage the community to do the same. So I had a letter drafted in November 23rd to DA DeFiore as well as the police commissioner, so I'm going to read it. Dear District Attorney DeFiore, you may recall that on August 31st, I forwarded you a document given to a Board of Education member by Robert Cox, a local blogger, which purported to identify 5 employees of the City School District of New Rochelle who had allegedly engaged in sex acts with school children. At that time, we asked both your office and the City of New Rochelle Public Commissioner to investigate these Commissioner to investigate these allegations, because if true, they constitute crimes against children and should be investigated by law enforcement authorities. Further to that request, we know that inquiries were in fact made by the New Rochelle Police Department. Unfortunately, however, we were given to understand that Mr. Cox told the police that he had no personal knowledge of what he had alleged, that the allegations were based upon statements which he had heard from third parties, and that he declined to identify those persons. Mr. Cox has now sent a new set of allegations in an email sent to all board members of the Board of Education on November 12, 2011, a copy of which is enclosed. That email repeats the allegations which we brought to your attention on August 31st, but also claims that there are additional victims of pedophile assaults, and that Mr. Cox believes that there were videotape records of at least 1 and possibly more alleged sexual encounters between staff and students. As public officers, we need to see these claims resolved. If Mr. Cox has actual evidence which might lead to proof of crimes against children, then the persons who committed them must be prosecuted. If he does not have such evidence, then we need closure so that the public confidence in our schools will not be eroded. Since he has alleged serious crimes, we believe that inquiry must be made by the agencies with the resources and expertise to do so. Once again, we encourage you to contact Mr. Cox as soon as possible to obtain any information bearing on possible crimes against children in the New Rochelle Public Schools. We provided that number, and we again assure your office can count on the school district's full cooperation. Our superintendent of schools, Mr. Richard Organishek, can be contacted at the following number, and I can be reached at the following numbers. Our legal counsel can be reached at the following number. Please keep us advised in the investigation to the extent permissible as you proceed. Thank you for your prompt attention on this matter. And we are reading this because we want to make sure that everyone knows we do take this seriously. And while we have heard from, community, or accusations have been made by community members that they do not want to come to us, you must tell someone. We do not have any open understanding of any abuse happening within our schools with any of our children. And we encourage you that if you know of something or know of someone, it is imperative that they go to the proper authorities, because we will not tolerate any of our children being in danger in our schools.
Let me just say that the remarks made by Ms. Petrone are largely inaccurate characterization of my communications with the school district, self-serving though they may be. In the aftermath of the Martinez arrest, there were promises made of an independent investigation of the entire matter. That never happened. As the months have gone by, these promises have been forgotten. I'm here to remind you. One thing that has changed since Jose Martinez was sentenced in October, we now have the Penn State case. We've all seen the many terrible mistakes that Penn State officials made, many of whom are now paying the price or soon will, and we have seen how they are trying to make things right. We see no such effort here in New Rochelle. Instead, we see the same old attempt to sweep the entire matter under the rug and pretend it never happened, it being that in this building a child was repeatedly raped. If this board does anything other than vote to create an independent investigation into the entire matter along the lines of what has been done at Penn State, then you are deliberately choosing to risk leaving in position of authority over children people who refuse to act to protect children as the law requires when faced with the choice of allowing possible sexual abuse of children to continue or making waves within the school district bureaucracy that might harm their career. I have been raising this issue privately for a month in the hope that by now you would have acted without public prompting. Obviously, that has not worked. In the years prior to his arrest, Jose Martinez was the basis for repeated complaints by school district employees. I am aware of 6 employees who made formal complaints to their superiors. I am aware of 3 administrators and 1 board member who received these complaints. Of these 10 individuals, not a single one filed or caused to be filed a report to Child Protective Services as required by law. A security guard who was typically posted outside Martinez's office was so distressed about what she observed going on with Martinez that she set up a meeting with Mr. Bongo and Ms. Robinson to discuss her concerns. The secretary at Jefferson says she was so concerned about Martinez that she wrote a letter to Richard Organishak. A nurse at Isaac was concerned about Martinez and reported her concerns to Mr. Bongo. 2 Isaac employees were went outside the building altogether after being rebuffed by Mr. Bongo. Now, on April 9th of this year, I received an email about this, which read, quote, Bongo and Robinson were both made aware that something was amiss with Martinez because he was having closed-door meetings with students before he was given the position at J.E., Jefferson Elementary. I'll simply say 2 staffers went to a board member to express some concerns. That board member spoke to Bongo and Robinson. They, in turn, warned Martinez. In my response that same day, I wrote, quote, will you please tell me the board member you reference, unquote. Shortly thereafter, I got the following response, quote, Petrone. 2 staffers approached her. From what I understand, she wasn't sure what to do and felt it was something Bongo and Robinson should handle as stewards of the building, unquote. Several weeks later, I was on my way to cover a hearing of the Martinez trial at New Rochelle City Court, where I was approached by Elena De Leon. She spoke with me for about an hour in the parking lot at City Hall. Our conversation was observed by then Board President Sarah Richmond. I was already aware that De Leon had raised concerns to Richard Organishak about Martinez's behavior with young boys. De Leon spent most of that time with me attempting to justify why she would not go to authorities or make public that she had made repeated written complaints to Organishak about Martinez. She stated that she believed she could do more good by keeping quiet and keeping her job where she could help ELL students. The nature of the complaints follow a pattern. Closing and locking the office door, pulling down the shades, giving boys who got in trouble rewards, pizza, money, gifts, etc., giving several favorites free run of his office to use his computer and otherwise hang out. Anyone who has knowledge of how pedophiles operate would know that complaints being made about Martinez represented classic grooming behavior of victims by a sexual predator. If anyone ought to know about these signs, it would be the very people who receive these reports, and yet no one ever filed or caused to be filed a report with Child Protective Services. Any honest board member would acknowledge that employees in New Rochelle fear retaliation. They know that popping your head up to point out wrongdoing by other employees is only going to get them in trouble. Given this, what does it say to you that at least 6 different people were concerned enough to write letters or emails or request meetings to discuss their concerns about Jose Martinez, yet no reports were ever filed? I count 6 people going to 4 other people for a total of 10 people who knew about these complaints. I'm sure there are more. Why were these people concerned about Martinez inviting young boys into his office alone, pulling down the shades and locking the doors? I would remind you that these were your own employees reporting their reasonable suspicions that Martinez was sequestering himself with young boys for the purpose of engaging in sexual contact with them. And by the way, every concern that these 6 people had turned out to be entirely justified. Martinez was, in fact, having sex in his office behind closed doors. I would urge the board to have an independent investigation along the lines of what was done at Penn State.
Thank you. And I also have copies of the letter that I read with the attorney, which has Mr. Cox's allegations from the board on here. But before our next speaker, I just want to clarify the record once again, because I am really quite sick and tired of constantly being accused of something that never happened. So, Mr. Cox, you are misinformed, to say the least, with regard to any board member knowing. And this is my reputation, the reputation of this board, and I won't get into a dialogue back and forth. But every board member on this Board of Education found out exactly the same time. So for someone to say that they brought this to my attention beforehand, especially when I had a child in this school who was engaged with Mr. Martinez in his office at different times, is appalling. That you continue to go on and on about this is ridiculous. But we do take it seriously, and there are investigations going on, but you will spin it any way you want, and that is your right. That's your freedom to do that. But don't ever accuse me of something that never happened.
It's tough for me to speak after that. It's very upsetting, and I'm not talking on that topic at all. And I just hope you resolve that. And it's awful, and it changes lives. And
Right.
whatever happened, please straighten it out. And honestly,
My name is Peggy Godfrey. I am still, even when I hear Mr. Cox talks, I am still very upset to hear all these stories. Now, at least 15 years ago, when I was working in New York City, we had this whole problem, and we were told never be in a room by yourself with a child. And as a supervisor, I had to tell all the teachers, I don't want to even see you put one little finger on a child. You are not to touch them. You are not to be with them alone in a classroom. So I'm finding this posturing by the board a little hard to believe, that you didn't know these things, or you weren't aware of these kind of regulations, or that they were not in force in the school system here, and even if people were standing outside the door and saw this man inside the room, I mean, how could anybody just stand there and just not do anything about it? I just find it incredible. So, I mean, I'm siding with Mr. Cox on this, because I think he's totally right. And as a former supervisor and a former teacher, I know that these things should never happen. And I think, you should not take this attitude that he's wrong, because he's not wrong. And it's been going on a long time.